They never heard the shells that killed them, only the faint whisper of air bending under a force they could not see, a force that crept across France like an invisible reaper. German tank crews, once confident behind inches of steel, suddenly realized their armor meant nothing. In that brief, hollow silence before the blast, they understood the truth. American artillery didn't just hunt machines. It hunted men. War is often remembered by the machines that roared the loudest, tanks, planes, guns. But history's most decisive blows were delivered by things that were never seen, only felt. In the summer heat of 1944, as Europe trembled beneath the weight of advancing armies, a new kind of fear seeped into the German ranks. It was not the fear of soldiers charging or bombers screaming overhead, but the fear of distant thunder that struck with impossible precision, shattering steel, hope, and the illusion of safety. This is the story of the moment the Panzers knew the battlefield had changed forever. It began on the hedge-rowed fields of Normandy, where German Panzer commanders, hardened by years of victories across Europe, suddenly found themselves trapped inside a silent duel they could not win, as American artillery, massive, coordinated, impossibly fast, began to move like a living organism across the front, sensing every shift, every breath, every vibration in the soil. The 105s and 155s firing not in scattered bursts, but in synchronized waves timed with mathematical precision, adjusted by forward observers hidden like ghosts among the orchards and stone farm walls, marking each German counterattack with invisible threads of calculation. And the Panzers, those iron predators built to dominate open plains, now crawled helplessly between narrow lanes and shadowed fields where every turn might lead to a fire mission already pre-planned hours earlier. And the men inside those steel giants began to feel the weight of something far more terrifying than enemy armor, an enemy they could not see, could not hear, could not fight, an enemy who struck from 20 miles away with shells that arrived faster than the mind could react, shells that didn't scream like old artillery, but snapped the air apart with flat, unforgiving crack that rattled bones and burst lungs. German tank crews wrote in their diaries that they felt hunted, that the ground seemed to react to them, that American fire followed the tanks as if guided by a mind, and as the hedgerow battles dragged on, they realized the truth was even worse. It wasn't luck or coincidence. It was an industrial force powered by thousands of guns, endless ammunition, tireless logistics, and a doctrine designed not merely to support infantry, but to break the enemy's spirit itself. And in those suffocating, smoke-choked afternoons, as the thunder of American batteries rolled endlessly across the landscape, the Panzers finally understood that for the first time in the war, the battlefield did not belong to them. By July, the truth had spread like a whispered omen through every Panzer regiment pushing against the American lines, a quiet acknowledgement that no amount of armor or gunnery skill could protect them from an artillery system that behaved more like a natural disaster than a weapon. And as German tank crews advanced across the rolling plains near St. Lo, they noticed how the Americans fought with a strange, quiet confidence, as if they were never alone on the field, as if some distant guardian watched every movement, every flare, every dust trail rising from a tank's engine deck. Forward observers sat high in church towers or crawled through wheat fields with radios pressed tight against their helmets, adjusting fire with eerie calm, while miles behind them entire battalions of howitzers shifted their barrels in unison, ready to engulf a single crossroads or a hedgerow with 10,000 pounds of steel in under a minute. And the Panzers, once the terror of Europe, found themselves paralyzed by decisions that used to be routine, commanders hesitating to move, loaders jumping at every distant thump, gunners scanning the sky as if the shells might appear from above instead of the horizon, because the Americans had mastered something the Germans could never match. Speed, not tanks or planes, but a communication, logistics, and fire direction. A single American request for artillery could transform into a storm of destruction faster than a tank could shift gears. And the Germans learned that by the time they heard the first shell explode, the next 30 were already in the air, already committed, already inevitable. At Hill 192, the psychological breaking point arrived when an entire German counterattack, 20 Panzers and hundreds of infantry, simply dissolved under a perfectly timed rolling barrage, each artillery lift matching the pace of American infantry, like a deadly choreography. And surviving German officers later admitted that this was the moment they realized the battlefield was no longer governed by courage or steel, but by a war machine capable of overwhelming precision, where American guns reached farther, fired longer, supplied faster, and struck with such suffocating accuracy that even veteran tank aces felt as helpless as recruits. And in the choking dust and trembling earth of that hill, the fear of U.S. artillery became something deeper than tactical anxiety. It became the understanding that they were facing an enemy whose industrial heart beat louder than any engine ever forged in Germany. As the war bled into the bitter winter of 1944, that fear matured into something darker, something that settled into bones of every Panzer crewman as they rumbled through the Ardennes under sky, so cold it felt carved from iron. And even in the deep forest where trees stood like black pillars and roads twisted into narrow ribbons of ice, the Germans discovered that distance, terrain, and darkness offered no shelter from American guns. At Elsenborn Ridge, a place they believed could be crushed beneath the treads of their armored spearheads, they instead found an unmovable wall of artillery, American batteries arranged with such density, such coordination, that the ridge itself seemed to breathe fire, and the Panzers advancing down frozen roads were met with storms so violent that men later wrote the earth open like a mouth and tried to swallow us. Because U.S. gunners didn't merely fire, they hunted, shifting mission from target to target with terrifying speed, saturating crossroads, hammering assembly areas, obliterating cover before crews even realized they were spotted. The precision was unnatural, as if the Americans had learned to read German intentions before the orders were even given, and veterans who once believed in the indestructibility of their machines now gripped the interior handles of their turrets with shaking hands, knowing that a single strike, just one, could turn 40 tons of steel into a furnace. And as they crawled forward through the snow, lace fog, they realized the artillery coming for them was not random nor desperate but systematic, each battery fed by an endless river of trucks, ammunition, fuel, and replacements that Germany could no longer dream of matching. Some tank commanders swore the Americans could drop shells into footprints. Others claimed the shells had just in midair. And though none of that was true, the fear itself became real enough to warp judgment, erode discipline, and hollow out resolve. Because while German tanks were built to win duels, American artillery fought a different kind of war, one that shattered before machines, one that conquered the mind long before it destroyed the body. And as the skies filled with the dull glow of distant fire missions lighting the horizon, the Panzers finally understood that this was not a battle between armor and guns, but between an exhausted empire running out of breath and a nation whose heartbeat of industry and firepower would not slow until the very last. Shell had fallen. In the final months of the war, as Germany collapsed under the weight of a world it could no longer resist, the last surviving Panzer crews carried with them not the pride of steel or the memory of victories long faded, but the quiet, unshakable dread of the distant thunder that followed them from Normandy to the Ardennes, a reminder that no armor, no matter how thick, how revered, how feared, could shield a man from a force shaped not by hatred but by sheer, relentless inevitability. And when the guns at last fell silent, when the smoke cleared from ruined cities and frozen forests, those who lived through the fire spoke of American artillery not with bitterness, but with a strange, haunted respect, because they had seen a truth most soldiers never witness, that war is not decided by the loudest machines or the bravest men, but by the unseen pressures that grind nations apart, by the factories that never sleep, by the supply lines that stretch farther than fear itself, and by the quiet determination of thousands of hands loading shells far from the battlefield, hands that will never know the faces of the men their labor destroyed. And in that understanding lies the most painful lesson of all, that victory and loss, triumph and ruin, courage and terror are often born from the same invisible forces. And when the echoes of war fade into history, what remains is not the clash of tanks or the roar of guns, but the fragile truth that behind every explosion, every shattered machine, every moment of fear, there are human lives caught in the gears of something far larger than themselves, lives that remind us that the real cost of war is measured not in territory or trophies, but in the quiet, irreversible changes left upon the souls of those who survived its fire.